A very good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Forward with Avneet Kohli. I started this series soon after the West Asia war broke out. And one of the things that I did straight up then was launch something called the Founder Pulse Survey to really hear from entrepreneurs on the ground with the different challenges that they were facing. And being a ecosystem builder myself, whilst I designed multiple initiatives to support founders all the time, making sure that those efforts were being directed in a decision that they value, in a direction that they valued most in that given time. So some of the insights that came back from running the Founder Pulse survey was that a lot of people complained of mental health and emotional exhaustion and decision fatigue in times of the West Asia war being as challenging as operational hurdles of fundraising, of financing their working capital gaps, of paying salaries and maintaining teams, irrespective of the uncertainty. So, I know that mental health, emotional resilience, a lot of these topics might have someone, watching raise an eyebrow where they do see the relevance of it, but sometimes it's difficult to show up that way and talk about these sensitive subjects. Today, I have a very special speaker who's kind of been through all of that, who's seen the highs, who's seen the lows, and who's here equipped to talk to us about what it truly means to be resilient and how can we manage a lot of these different situations in our life. If I were to introduce her formally, Dr. Neeta Bhushan is a global keynote speaker, a 5 times award winning author, a wellness founder of a brand called Chai Tonics, and the host of The Brave Table, a top 13 winning wellness podcast dedicated to resilience, leadership, and living boldly. She is the founder of Chai Tonics, a luxury Ayurvedic wellness brand crafted for high achieving women who want real energy, nervous system support, and deep calm. Her work blends behavioral psychology, somatic healing, and Ayurvedic wisdom into tools that women and high performance can use in their bodies, in their businesses, and in their lives. And today I'm going to be talking to her about the nervous system behind high performance. So, with a round of applause, with wherever you are in your seat, let's bring in Dr. Neeta Bhushan. Welcome.
Avneet, I'm so glad. I'm so glad we're talking about this. This is something that I feel like it can't be talked about enough, and it goes with saying the title of my latest book. How to embrace the joy in chaos and find magic in the mess. That sucked. Now what? And so I'm just really honored to sit with you.
Pleasure is completely mine, Neeta. And I must say that you might just have another, third career or fourth career brewing, because it also takes courage to name your book That Sucked, What Now? So maybe, I don't know if you're a stand up comic that's brewing as your next avatar, but kudos to you on that. It's pretty
How did you
unconventional.
know that? That's been one of the things on my bucket list and goals is to actually do a stand up set.
Is it?
Yes, actually, absolutely, yes. That's one of I took improv a very long time ago after getting out of a tumultuous marriage and going through divorce, a big breakup that really shook my confidence in a lot of ways. I think that any personal life instance can do that. And so one of the things that I did, I was a cosmetic dentist back then, and
Hmm.
very young, very impressionable. I was in my late 20s, probably going through a Saturn return. And so I listened to a girlfriend and I said, okay, I'm going to do this year of yes. And so I signed up for this improv class, and it fully changed my life. I was so deathly afraid of going on stage because you had to perform and you had to do whatever, your partner was going to do and then kind of riff off of it. And
Hmm.
so, but that ended up being the catalyst that really supported my journey in my abilities as a public speaker to go on stage. And I loved it so much that because I was deathly afraid of public speaking before that, that I then started doing, I started learning stand-up comedy. And we have this thing, I grew up in Chicago, and it's called Second City. So it's kind of like the Harvard of, stand-up comedians and improv, and people who do that, they kind of go into like SNL, Saturday Night Live. Like that's the path, and I obviously did not want to do that. I just wanted to be better at public speaking, but I was around all these mega performers and funny people, and I'm like, I can never crack a joke. I'm a cosmetic dentist. I have to take myself seriously. And that they would just rip me up and so you couldn't not, see a different lens of things. And I think that's also contributed to a lot of the perspective that I have around building resilience. And even in the 4 books that I've written around emotional resilience, mental health, even coaching, I think that a lot of it is we cannot take ourselves too seriously when we are in a moment of, a sucky time or a sucky moment. So yeah, kudos to my the title that sucked. Now what?
I don't know if I've shared this with you, but I often crack a joke with my husband that if it wasn't for your sense of humor, we wouldn't be together. It's honestly the only reason I married him, because I really value that. I happen to be a very serious person as well. And even if something is not to be taken as seriously, in order for me to be serious, in order for me to be able to put forward my best performance, I will really approach everything with a lot of sincerity and seriousness. So he really helps me, lighten things up. And also, you never really know how life has its way of preparing you, right? Who would have known back then that you were going to be an author, a speaker, and do a lot of the other things that you're doing? And um, just for context, for everyone, I've had the opportunity to kind of check in on where you are so thanks to social media over the last few years. But for those who are probably seeing you for the first time, getting to know you for the first time, talk to us a little bit about how did you arrive at being where you are today, and how did you turn founder?
Yeah, well, I started my journey as a cosmetic dentist. I think that, born and raised in the US to immigrant parents, it was kind of that immigrant dream, right? Doctor, dentist, lawyer, engineer. So my mom was Filipino, my dad is Indian. And so this kind of instilling this American dream of these are the things that you have to do. And so, yeah, you do all of that. I kind of performed in all of those ways. I had a lot of life, growing up. I did lose 3 members of my family before I was 19. My mom, my brother, and my dad. And so I think the heaviness of loss has also catapulted me into really embracing, like, if that can happen in your teenage years, your most primitive and formative years, while having to raise a younger brother, I think you'll be okay. And I think that, and it's not to bypass, because I have a whole podcast talking about all of the ways that, trauma heals and how we have our trauma responses. But it has been a life journey for me to really be able to speak on a lot of these topics. And what really sparked my curiosity in, human psychology, human behavior management, why we make the decisions that we make, which then obviously led me to in my personal life, having overlapped relationships, but very much excelling in school, excelling in everything, and going off to have success in the traditional way. As a cosmetic dentist, opened up a practice right after school, all of these things from the outside. But then on the inside, I was crumbling. I didn't know who I was. I had this facade that I had it all together. But in fact, I was like dying inside because I didn't know who I was, right? We have this idea of what other people want us to be. And I was this golden child for my community, for my family. And so fast forward going through all of that, I realized after going through that, messy time in my life, I started doing things out of my comfort zone, things like improv, which then led me to doing these pitch fests with VCs and startup founders. And I had started a nonprofit at the time called Independent Awakening to really support women and girls in building their confidence. And I was also a cosmetic dentist. And so I was growing my practice. I had that newfound confidence. And so while I started to realize I had a knack for business building and really building up other people alongside of me, because then there was a point where my practice was running outside of me and I was doing all of this other healing. And then I was getting asked to speak on stages for my nonprofit. And so people then wanted to hear my story. And so then I started to get into motivational speaking and mentoring and then coaching. And while alongside of that, other doctors and dentists wanted to know, wait, how is she not in her practice 6 days a week, busting her brains in doing this practice, and things were thriving for me. And so I recognize I can help other people, doctors, dentists, lawyers, people who have service-based businesses. And that's what started this, coach consulting hat. And when I sold my business, when I sold my healthcare company, now over a decade ago, 11 years ago now, I went into kind of this mentoring, coach consulting, and I was also an angel investor on the side. Really mentoring, early stage female founded startups. And one of the things I noticed with a lot of these founders was, their emotional health. They would break down at the sight of, any disagreements with their co-founders. And they didn't have the emotional intelligence to, stick through if one VC is saying no, or their fundraising is going bad. That it was just like a very much an internal thing. And I noticed that a lot with these younger founders. And so that kind of led me to, really supporting early stage female startups, and which then led me to also meeting my, now partner in life, husband. And we ended up writing 2 books together in the area of coaching. And really for me, coming at coaching as understanding the psychology behind coaching, why people make decisions, and really kind of diving into the emotional resilience aspect of it. I wrote my first book in 2016, so a decade ago, called Emotional Grit. And then I started working with, leadership founders and just speaking at corporations and things like that around the same work. And so for the last decade, really my work has been around supporting women leaders into not just the, emotional resilience side of things and their mental health, but also why do we hustle in the way that we do until we burn ourselves out? Because I've burnt myself out more than a few times. And are we hustling at the cost of what? The expense of, us to prove, something? Do we have a chip on our shoulder? Chapter 2 has that as the title, the chip we wear on our shoulder. Like, who are we trying to prove? And where is this coming from, this ambition? Is it coming from wounding, or is it coming from we actually want to help people? And so that's really the center of my work, really bridging, Eastern philosophy and Western psychology, and I think in a grounded approach that's also from a lived experience. But from that, I've built, coaching certifications, certified over 3,000 women in one of the companies. And yeah, I think as of last year, we moved to Dubai, and I really wanted to focus on the next iteration of what nervous system work looks like, but in the form of a physical product, because of course I had never done that before, and neither loves challenges as a double Capricorn. and so I yeah, some of the things that have healed me in my deepest, darkest moments are those moments of coming back home to myself. And the one thing that I found that has really healed me in the past few years from postpartum depression, after having, both of my children, to just navigating loss and grief and bringing community together. I'm such a community builder, just like you are, has been, the rituals that are from our family members, our ancestors. And so now I've founded a superfood adaptogenic vegan chai company that's based in the US. And we just launched over 7 months ago. So that's kind of where I'm at. I do love, the art of business. And I think that, as my husband would say, we are a work of art. We're ever evolving. And yeah, well, how fun is it to be a student again? Because I feel like that's the next iteration of our expression as we go along in the human journey, human experience, I should say.
Thank you so much for sharing, Neeta. When you were speaking, I was just like, I think we have a lot of different threads that are common. I don't know if it's going to be enough time to get into that today, but I literally feel like if I were on the other side, certain things that you've lived through and I've lived through are so similar. And however, I want to roger into where you are today, which is after going through all of this, firstly, still choosing to be a founder, right? You may have done cosmetic dermatology earlier, but then trying to build another, women's wellness community driven chai brand. Um, and you've also been in Dubai amidst this entire post Asia, West Asia war. So talk to us about how did this affect you and how are you currently navigating this?
Yeah. So, I mean, for everybody or anyone who's watching this and kind of is in this region, I think for all of us, and we were talking about this before we hit record earlier. I think it can affect people in a few ways, and the first way is this: how do we respond to traumatic stress? How do we respond to trauma in our lives? And I know some people don't really like the word trauma.
Hmm.
But really it's our stress response. Do we freeze if somebody has to have a conversation with us?
Hmm.
Do we, do we flight? Do we leave? Are we unavoidant or are we avoidant as somebody who doesn't like confrontation? So in your
Hmm.
friendships or even in your business partnerships, if someone has something to say or has some feedback to give to you, how do you respond to that? So these are the same things, like how you respond to the small things is how you respond to everything, right? And I think, with this West Asia war, what we realize is there's people who stop in their tracks, and their only response is survival, because that initiates survival mode. You're like, I can't do anything else. I have to keep everybody safe because those are our basic needs as humans. And if we're
Hmm.
hearing noise all the time and sounds all the time, of course, you're not going to want to be in your creative flow to output anything. So don't beat yourself up if there are things that have happened, or if you haven't been in the mood, or if you haven't been motivated, or you're motivated by a scarcity and a fear because you're like, oh gosh, I don't know if I am going to be able to fundraise. I don't know if I am going to be able to pull this round together. Because of what's going on, and those fears are visceral, I think. And then there's the other side of things where your trauma, or the trauma response is to either withdraw. And so you're like pretending that everything's okay, nothing's going on here, we're totally fine, and you're going to overwork and you're going to overdo.
Hmm.
And because we're in denial, right? So we're going to go overwork, overdo. And there are some that are like, okay, there's nothing I can control in this situation, nothing at all. The only thing I can control is my creative output. And many of you who are probably watching this probably heard me talk a little bit about that, is that we cannot control what's around. We can't even control the sounds that we hear because it's just coming out of our phones. But what we can control is the way we respond to it. What we can control is our output. What we can control is the energy of where we put our time. And I was guilty of this too. I was sending my friends memes and all of the things, to keep things lighthearted or whatever, but also to be in the know, right? And at the same time, it's like, how can you channel that better into creativity to push yourself forward? Because the only thing we have is to keep going forward, right? And for me, it was, okay, what else can I create? What else can I create? Because this business is not even based here. It's based different time zone all the way at the other side of the globe. And yeah, did we have challenges? Oh my gosh, so many, from supply chain, from just kind of, some of my team members didn't really understanding what was really going on. And we had to lay off quite a few. I had a few agencies, like I was just sharing. And so, really being able to dial in what your numbers are, what's needed. And I know for a lot of founders, this is kind of where we had to make some really tough decisions. And to say, everything, no, we're all just trying to figure it out as we go along. And I think that's the beauty of being faced at a crossroads. The resiliency is to be able to look at a tough situation or a hard situation and to say, okay, and it's the things that I say to my kids, you can do hard things. You can say sorry to that kid at the playground. You can say, let's try this again with your sister, right? And so the same things that we would say to the little people in our life, we can say to ourselves, yes, we will get through this. We are going to go through some hard times and we are going to be okay. So to accept the discomfort, to accept that you are in a state of discomfort, I think that's the biggest thing. And, to accept that, okay, we just don't know everything, and that is okay. And to be okay in the uncertainty that you are going to be okay. Right? To be able to surrender and trust where everything is at. Because I think as founders and as people who are so sure about everything, we have to constantly be in control. And I think has reminded us that sometimes the only thing that you can control is the next hour or the next day, or, your output, or the way you show up to your friends and your family and your team members, right?
Neither, there's another underlying behavior that is very common with founders, which is what kind of drives them into a scarcity mindset or doing a lot of these things that you're talking about, which is, if you look around us, it's always achievement that is celebrated, right? It is the unicorn founder who raised that amount of capital, who got acquired by XYZ, who's all over Forbes. It's those kind of things that are applauded, that are acknowledged, that are loved and respected by others, right? It's actually very refreshing for someone like yourself to talk about things that you've been through in such a vulnerable fashion. And most founders are so busy trying to keep it all together. I mean, even if they allow themselves some short spaces of being human and not having it all figured out, but they do want to appear like everything is, their self-worth and this culture of achievement and hustle, it's all so interconnected. From where you're at, how do you view this? And very often when you see yourself spiraling between some of these things, one is the external factors that you cannot control, but how do you manage yourself as a founder internally when you find yourself tying your self-worth to external achievements?
I think it comes down to a lot of the inner work that we've done, right? And the inner work that we are exposed to. I think being a founder, it pokes holes at your biggest insecurities and what really drives you. And I think for the longest time, for me specifically, my biggest drive was, okay, well, what are the spirits or the ghosts of my parents, are they proud? Would they be proud today? I'm doing this for them, right? Even though that was like a very subconscious thing that kind of keeps driving you. And I think that, for some people, I think, of course, right? If you grew up in a very scarcity mindset, things like now will trigger that scarcity, and it'll trigger you to overwork to make sure that you can provide for your family. And which is why I really love being here, because we have so much perspective with the 200 nationalities that you see, because some people have really lived through what war actually looks like, and kind of being able to navigate the different ways, and not comparing our journeys, but to say, oh wow, that's really humbling. And I think at the same time, to really ask yourself the question of what season and stage of life are you in? Because somebody like myself in my 20s, oh yeah, I wanted to please everybody. I wanted to work as hard as possible, 12 to 18-hour days, no breaks, let's go, and now in my 40s, I'm like, in building again. I'm like, okay, previous Neeta would stay up all night, and we're gonna get this done, and we're gonna go ham on this, we're gonna keep going and knock it out of the park. And now I say, okay, at what cost? Whose validation am I trying to earn? And that's something that me personally in my journey I've really questioned. And I think for founders, this will poke holes in some of the biggest insecurities that we have, but I think it's a beautiful way to go inward and say, who am I doing this for? What am I trying to achieve? What is my North Star? Am I trying to create impact, or am I trying to make as much money as possible? Am I trying to sell this? Am I trying to, who is this for? And I think that will really open our eyes as to what really drives us in this season, if you're open to it. And I've met many founders who are just not there yet, and that's okay. That's just a journey that they're on, and maybe it's okay for that season and stage of life. But I think if you are open to it, it is the greatest teacher and spiritual awakening that you can have, just to be able to point the mirror and the lens back at yourself, if you're ready to receive the wisdom that comes from it.
Thanks for sharing that, Neeta. I think what I'm picking up is that this always on culture, right, is, in my own way, it's gotten the worst of me. It's just that I find myself with very vast and varied types of people. And there are some of them, if you talk about work life balance and emotional resilience, these are, the the guys who grew up in the 70s or were born in the 70s. They're like, okay, no, all this is okay, but it doesn't matter, right? And then there is today's generation, where for us to talk about mental health, I've been through my own roller coaster. I continue to, tackle stuff daily, but um, I do see the essence of what you're trying to say. Whereas so many founders, they really drive themselves to the brink of crash. And then it's like a lot more time that they lose in recovery and trying to build themselves back. So, from where you're at, because you've seen that and you have, a wellness founder today, if someone was to draw work life balance and build a sustainable go at entrepreneurship, what do you think are some quick hacks or, simple ways to check yourself, simple rituals that could help in setting this in perspective?
Well, here's the thing. There's, even in this ideal world that we live in, I would love to say that there's work-life balance. And at the same time, I think there are seasons of it. I just shared with you, I wrote this book 3 years ago, actually 4 years ago, but we launched it 3 years ago. And I was on like 250 podcasts. My daughter, my daughter was 1, my son was 3. It was an insane time. And did I have work-life balance then? No, I did not. Even last year when we moved here, trying to do all of these things, did I have work-life balance then? No. However, do we have to wait until the brink of, getting a diagnosis, seeing somebody, seeing a loss, getting served divorce papers, finding out, there's betrayal. Do we have to wait till that moment to pay attention to what's going on in our lives? I think, many times life will jolt us awake with a lot of personal things that can go on. And so to your point, I think, can you build in, structure so that, okay, after, now in this day and age, after 7 p.m., unless I'm doing my US calls, which are, a couple times a week, if you are texting me after 7 p.m., I'm probably not going to pay attention. And the reason why is because that's family time. And on Sundays, do not message me. I am not, unless we're going to the pool or somewhere else, it's not business time. And I think, to be able to have these boundaries for yourself. Also, I think, having seen both of my parents succumb to medical diseases, I think becoming somebody really fit and having not just mental fitness, but physical fitness, that is something that I have never left behind. And so that is a non-negotiable. I will work out 5 times a week, rain or shine, no matter what. And that's another boundary. I love chai so much, and that brought me, permission to bring myself back home. Is there a ritual where you can actually, whether it's breathing for 5 minutes, putting your hand over your heart. This is a somatic practice to say, okay, I'm here, I'm safe, the world is not ending, I'm okay, I'm alive, and I'm grateful. These are some of the things that I teach my kids, and also, many of my students that are in all parts of the world, whether digital, in person, in the boardroom, here right now. But these are simple things that we can do to replenish our energy, when we're having a tough day, a stressful day, when we're not motivated. And I think that, goes without saying, you can actually build a business with rituals that support you in season and stage of life,
Anita, how do you identify when you have a dysregulated nervous system? How does it show up?
Oof, I'm snapping, I'm yelling at my kids, yell at my team members. Listen, I'm as human as the next person. I think when we're dysregulated, we do things that we will regret, right? Now I've learned, and the 2 to 3 things that I like to do is I catch myself. I'm like, okay, before I respond to this email, before I respond to this text message, before I send a voice note that I'm going to regret, can I count up to 10? Can I get up? Can I fill my glass of water? Can I replenish myself? And these are really teeny tiny hacks, but it has changed everything, not only in our household, because now my kids they're not toddlers anymore. They're going to be 5 and 7. And so when they were teeny tiny, we had meltdowns all over the place. And so, that was my biggest, I was like dysregulated every single day of the week. So that's why I had to write a book at that point. And so we didn't want to raise kids who were constantly, screaming in the house as well. So it had to start with us, right? Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to instill this? And I think this is also true for having team members and things like that. When we are feeling dysregulated, can we take a moment to pause and breathe and come back to ourselves and put, like I have a few YouTube comedians that I'll just like play a funny clip, and I'm just like, dying of laughter, and then it changes my state, and I'm like, all right. Or I have a playlist that I'll play where it gets me in the mood, gets me all, hyped up. Or if it's one of those days where I need to go into my closet and take a pillow and scream in my pillow for 30 seconds. And I guarantee you, because I've done this in all sorts of places, you cannot scream in your pillow for 30 seconds. You just can't. You stop at like 10. You stop at 15. And I've shown my kids to do it, and they stop at 10 because they start giggling. And so when we're trying to do these practices that activate what's called the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve runs from our brain all the way down to our toes, and it activates our parasympathetic nervous system. It actually supports our rest and digest. One of the things that we can do is, yes, listening to music, laughing, screaming, humming, buzzing, meditating, of course, praying, all of these different things that we can do. But even just pausing, putting your hand over your heart 30 seconds to have that touch back to this area from neuroscience perspective, it activates the good hormones. It activates your oxytocin to actually calm down. And so these are some of the things that I like to do and I have so many different, there's tons of it in my book, but I think being dysregulated is something we all go through, and that's human nature on the daily, but it's the tools. What tools bring you back whole, back to yourself?
Neeta, the other thing you remind me of is one of the coaches I was working with. So I am an ICF credentialed coach, and I've always had a coach because I think it just helps me keep my mind in the right place. And for the longest time, I looked at rest as a reward, right? Whereas something that he helped me do was to make rest a part of the strategy for peak performance, right? So in times like these, it took me a while to start looking at it that way, like that entire reframe that he offered, and to incorporate that into my day-to-day steps. But ever since, it's kind of really helped me sustain energy, right, across a lot of these different things. Because you work with women closely as well, do you see any different patterns amongst men and women with the way how dysregulation shows up in both of them? And how can, for someone who's listening right now, who probably wants to show up to where you are, right, which is be vulnerable, be so transparent with what you're going through in the moment, but is really scared of judgment, is really scared of the way, he might be perceived or she might be perceived, what would you like to say to them? I think those are two questions in one, but I'll let you go for it.
Yeah. So I think the first part of your question around, the differences in men and women, when they're dysregulated, I think because majority of who I serve now, are women. And I think, with women, it's easy to keep going. And it's easy to keep going because we're so used to this overcompensating. We're so used to kind of being in our masculine, needing to showing up for everybody, whether it's at the office or at home, for our children, for our network, for our communities. There is no off button. And I think, with men too, respectively, that there's a lot that they hold. And so I think it is so important that, we have that outlet, because as humans in general, both men and women, we will snap at our partners. We will have that human reaction. We will, if our tank is not full of our own joy, this is a reminder to prioritize joy in every way, shape, or form possible. And so I think the dysregulation is about the same. I would just say that it is our birthright to really prioritize joy in the moments that light us up, with the people that light us up. And it's so easy to cancel on our friendships. It's so easy to cancel on things, or even overcommit because we're afraid to disappoint. And I think being here in this region, it's so much easier that people are just showing up depleted to somebody else's event, or showing up to somebody else's dinner, depleted, half not there. I'd rather you not come and stay home and rest, because you don't need to do all of that. And I think if you can be so clear with your boundaries, that would support a regulated nervous system to then show up so powerfully as you are. And then for, the last part of your question, what would I say to somebody who's struggling at this point? I think, to really find what is it that excites you right now, because while there can be doom and gloom if you look at the news, there can be doom and gloom when you get a text thread from people who don't even live in the region, and all of that is there. And while you get reminders of the outside world and the outside noise on the daily that can really affect your nervous system, it can really affect your mental health, it can really affect a lot of these things, the uncertainty. What you have in your own control is what comes into your sphere, whether it's what you're looking at, what you're consuming, what you're watching, what you're listening to. And for me, it's starting my day with affirmations and even visualizations, and the things, even the goals, the top 3 things that are going to move the needle today for the business. And I know that so many founders are so great at this, but I think this is that constant, okay, this is what's going to bring me back to myself. Otherwise, I'm just going to be haphazard and thinking that, I'm on this never ending rat race where I feel like you get to choose what season and stage you are in. And if this is a season of growth, great. But if this is a season of rest, take it. And that's totally fine too. I did a TED Talk last year, and it was called, How Do We Grow Through Some of Our Toughest Moments? And, it's true that when you take those breaks, you notice a difference in yourself, in the way that you're showing up. You notice that there's way more ideas that come into play just because you've given yourself that rest. And you might even notice that more things are even being able to manifest because you're able to attract the right people, the right opportunities, because you've given yourself that spaciousness to think. And so now, and I never did this before, but I'll leave you with this. I block time in my week for just thinking and brainstorming, and I might have 50,000 things that I might need to get done. But that hour in my week is so golden and I have nothing on my desk, because you need to have a clear desk in order to do this. And then you can create from this empty spaciousness. And I think it's so beautiful. And of course you hear people like, Warren Buffett has, space in his day in order to think. And I talk about some of that in my TED Talk as well, about giving yourself the grace of the pause, and how sometimes the pause can be, the most productive asset for you.
Tons and tons of nuggets of wisdom out there. Neeta, thank you so much for speaking to us. And I think for someone that's listening, I could resonate with so many different things that you said and find common threads. You've been so gracious with your time, with your wisdom. Thank you so much for being here. Any final thoughts that you'd like to conclude with that could help you and others watching move forward?
Oh my goodness. Well, Avneet, thank you so much for having me. If you are curious about any wisdom in braving your health, in your life, in the seasons and stages that you are in, you can definitely head over to the Brave Table, where we brave different areas of life, especially health, transitions, motherhood, spirituality, our relationships. And you can definitely get my book, That Suck Now What, wherever you get your books. And if you love chai, and if you're trying to go for the cleanest chai that actually tastes good, chaitonics.com. Thanks so much, Avneet.
Thank you so much, Neeta. Please be backstage with us. The next time, probably we need to have a chai and conversation on LinkedIn. But thank you. Absolutely. Thank you, Neeta. Thank you for being with us.
Of course.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we've been discussing the nervous system behind high performance. and how you could manage if you've been going through a funk. How can you get past it? I think Nita spoke about so many different things that you can do in order to ground yourself, in order to allow yourself grace, in order to set structure in your day to make sure that your physiology and your emotional state, along with the content that you consume. There were a lot of different little nuggets of wisdom to set yourself up for success. So I truly hope that this conversation helps you. If you've been feeling dysregulated, this helps you regulate yourself and come back to building your dreams in from a place of power and purpose. Until next time, this is Avneet Kohli bringing to you forward conversations that can move you forward, and I'll see you soon. Take care.